1913. The United States Central Bank has just come to fruition, creating a need for reserve banks across the country to oversee the treasury of certain districts. Chicago was elected the head of the 7th District because of its central location and its increasing economic prosperity. 1922. The United States is fresh out of World War I and experiencing great economic growth. Known as the Roaring Twenties, this was the rise of the Jazz Age, a time of technological advancements, economic prosperity, and bold optimism. This economic growth was accompanied by westward expansion, which transformed the agricultural terrain of Chicago into a young city looking to challenge the greatness of Philadelphia and New York. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, also known as the Chicago Reserve, was constructed by Graham Anderson Prost and White in 1922, one of many markers in Chicago's slow progression toward finding an identity. The Chicago Reserve contributes to Chicago's identity in a dichotomous way. While the whole city longed to create culture, the Chicago Reserve was a testament of Chicago's commercial power, housing a money museum that embodies culture through the advancement of commerce. This commercial power is best embodied by the monument structure. Graham Anderson Prost and White designed the Chicago Reserve in a neoclassical architectural style that is very rich, lavish, and heavily ornamented, resulting in a monument with a massive appearance, white exterior, and Corinthian colonnade, the colonnade being the most powerful classical aspect. Major renovations were made in 1954 and 1986 to keep up with the work demand that the Chicago Reserve faced. A more interesting renovation was completed in 2001, which created a 5,600 square foot money museum, featuring an interplay of elliptical forms, curves, and diagonal walls that created space of exploration, which allowed for the spread of culture in a commercial setting. The Chicago Reserve's archive states that its 65 feet tall Corinthian colonnade produced the impression of dignity and strength, in harmony with the power and purpose of the institution, a reference to the impenetrable temples of Greece and Rome. Temples in Greece, such as the Treasury of Athens at Delphi and the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, served as banks with credit systems. These temples were believed to be inviolable, and even had guards to inspire confidence in depositors. These temples continued to function as public treasuries even while under the rule of the Roman Empire. Temples in Rome, such as the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum, served as public treasuries but did not function as banks. But why was the Chicago Reserve created to resemble classical temples? Well, this classical rhetoric seen in Chicago was not new to the United States. Philadelphia had preceded Chicago, with Europe trumping them both. The Bank of England, constructed in 1939 in London, is the first bank with receptions of classical temples ever employed by architects. The first Bank of the United States, built in 1795 in Philadelphia, is the first bank with classical receptions ever constructed in the United States, creating an architectural template for banks to follow. But why were banks made with classical antiquities to begin with? Was Chicago truly competing with New York for the title as the quintessential modern American metropolis? Or was it simply drawing inspiration from the Roman Empire? Despite the reception made by Graham Anderson Prost and White, some architects were not fond of the neoclassical movement. Lois H. Sullivan, sometimes referred to as the father of modernism, heavily opposed neoclassical architecture. In his book, Kindergarten Chats and Other Writings, he states, "This is no Roman temple. It's a bank, just a plain, ordinary, everyday American bank, full of cold hard cash and other cold things." He believed that form follows the function. A railway station looks like a railway station, but banks hide behind the guise of a Roman temple. He ridiculed neoclassical banks, stating that the bankers should wear a toga since they wish to work within a temple. Despite him claiming that a Roman temple can no more exist in fact on Monroe Street, Chicago, USA, than can Roman civilization exist there, the neoclassical movement still remained popular up until the end of the 1920s, when Art Deco began to gain popularity. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago was constructed on the corner of LaSalle and Jackson. Known as the Financial Canyon of Chicago, the area where LaSalle ends at the front of the Chicago Board of Trade is the only one of its kind. Here, the Board of Trade is flanked by both the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and the Continental Illinois Bank. This area resembles Chicago's journey of discovery. The Continental Illinois Bank was built in a neoclassical style by Graham Anderson Prost and White, 1 year before the construction of the Chicago Reserve. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago was also designed in a neoclassical style, and the Chicago Board of Trade in an Art Deco architectural style. These buildings provide a snapshot of the legacy that occurred from the Columbian Exposition to the Century of Progress, a legacy that was short-lived but long remembered.